Steve, Scott, and I all got started in this business around the same time, right around 2003, late 2002, early 2003. And we've known each other for a long time, and we've been doing shows together for a long time, too. And I have never had to say words like the words I'm about to say, but here's the thought that I had coming into work today. Last time I saw people falling to their deaths was 20 years ago on September 11th, when Americans were falling to their death, the result of people who trained in Afghanistan. But a few days ago, I saw people falling to their deaths. I saw Afghans falling to their deaths as a result of people who trained in America. I don't know how to express the shame of that, but that's about as close as I can come to it. The situation in Afghanistan is not a question for political maneuvering against the Democrats or Joe Biden. It is a catastrophe on a historical scale, and the word that I cannot escape again and again and again and again and again and again. It's not catastrophe. It's not disaster. It's not anger. It's not hatred. It's not rage. It's simple shame. That's the only word that I can find to describe my feelings about this. Steve, 2 years ago or so, somewhere in there, I was privileged enough to be asked to do a series on the Cold War for Daily Wire. It was 14 episodes. And when I did the episode about Vietnam and getting out of Vietnam, I remember thinking, well, it doesn't get any worse than that. That picture of that helicopter in 1975 on the roof at the Saigon building, wasn't the embassy, it was an apartment complex, and a snaking line of people trying to get on that helicopter, which meant their lives, which meant living or dying. That picture of a helicopter leaving a city that had fallen to your enemies in the height of the most powerful military force on the face of the earth. To me, I remember saying, that is it. That's the low point in American history. I will never see shame like that again, certainly as long as I live. But then I see footage of a C-17 plowing through a crowd of 100 people on the ground. And then as I watch this airplane flying overhead, you see these small parcels dropping out. Usually these are paratroopers or maybe food supplies. But in this case, no. These are people who are fleeing the Taliban, who have been so desperate as to hang on to the side of a jet on the outside of the jet. And then eventually, as the plane continued to climb, you can watch it fly overhead and these small specks fall to the ground. These are people who are trying to get away from the catastrophic incompetence of the world's greatest superpower, who seems unable to secure an airport. And all of these hundreds and hundreds of people, Steve, trying to get on board that C-17, we have more than one, you know.
Yeah. It's a national humiliation, and worse than that, it emboldens the very worst actors
you have
around
no
the world
idea.
To a degree that was not true in 1975 when Saigon fell, because we weren't in Saigon. We hadn't been in South Vietnam for 2 years by the time South Vietnam fell. But Congress decapped President Ford. He couldn't send any aid. He couldn't send any material. He couldn't send anything, while the North Vietnamese, of course, were well supplied by the Soviets and the Communist Chinese. So we weren't directly in that fight. It was a horrible thing to lose an ally, and I'm so glad we were able to get so many people out. But it's not enough. It's never enough. You never get all your people out. And the things people will do to get out is, well, we just saw the worst example of that ever on Monday, Sunday, whatever day it was. It all's kind of blurring together at this point. I was talking with a Air Force general earlier this summer, and I have to be kind of vague because I don't want to get anybody in any career-ending trouble. But we were talking about the drawdown from Afghanistan, and I've been fatalistic about Afghanistan for many, many years now. It was clear that mission creep, nation building, all of this stuff we were doing it was never going to work. It was a mistake. And that we really needed to draw down to a minimum footprint, just enough people on the ground to keep an eye on things so that we know where to send the bombs. Exactly, because there are bad people in very bad need of killing there, and it's going to stay that way for a long time. So he was telling me, this Air Force general, that we were going to be down to Bagram Air Base and our presence in Kabul, and that would be it. And I thought, oh, so we'll be able to keep an eye on things and bomb the bad guys. It's just going to be harder going forward. And he said, yeah, that's a pretty good summation of what it's going to be. That was back in June. It was just a couple of weeks later I found out that we were bugging out of Bagram. First,
bugging out. That's the term. Bugging out.
This is such a colossal case of bad judgment. I was trying to come up with an analogy before this show, and the best one I could come up with is lame, because this is just so incredibly boneheaded. But it's like going out and getting a concealed carry permit, and you keep your pistol in your waistband around the house, but before you go to the bad part of town, you take it out and you leave it on the counter. That's the closest thing I can compare this to. It's absolute insanity to have done that. And once that happened, well, all the rest was more or less inevitable. We lost our major logistics base, our last remaining logistics base in Afghanistan. So the rest was just, Afghan army's going to fold. They don't have another choice, because we are clearly out of here. We're unable to support. We're unable to do anything. What really gets me is Joe Biden ran on this theme of Trump's a bumbler. He annoys our allies. I'm the international relations guy. I'm the steady hand. He sold out the Europeans cold. They had no idea this was coming. Their people are in just as much trouble as our people.
Yep,
he didn't consult.
they are.
He didn't advise. He didn't do anything. Okay, the Germans get a little huffy when Donald Trump says, hey, why aren't you spending 2%? 2% of your GDP on national defense, like you promised.
It's a perfectly reasonable question to ask, I might add.
Yeah, because the Russians are getting frisky, and maybe you might want to commit to your own national defense now and then. Pretty please. Trump did that. He wanted to make NATO stronger by getting its main European component to actually live up to its own defense commitments. Joe Biden sold our allies out, not just in Afghanistan. He sold out our allies in Europe, around the world. And the worst part is, mark my words, not a whole lot of people are aware of this, but over the last 20 years, China has made an economic colony out of most of sub-Saharan Africa to get the mineral wealth out. They don't send soldiers in. They don't plant their flags like the European powers did in the 19th century, but they're exploiting Africa far better than the Europeans ever did. And even the Belgian Congo was ruled more nicely than what the Chinese are doing. And so what's going to happen in Afghanistan? There's about $1 trillion worth of mineral wealth in those mountains. Chinese workers will come in. Beijing will supply arms and money to the Taliban to keep the relative peace and to keep the population in compliance. And the Chinese workers will extract all that mineral wealth at minimum cost to Beijing. And the people of Afghanistan will be exploited and oppressed in the way that the left claims we've been doing for the last 20 years. And the exploitation will be unlike anything Afghanistan has ever known. This is coming, mark my words. My only question is, now that Beijing is stepping into this vacuum that Biden has left, did the big guy get his 10%?
He usually does. Scott, you did your segment this week on the Taliban's, makeover. It's cosmetic makeover, and how a message to useful idiots everywhere. No, we're going to be great. It's going to be like governance from. We're like the Brentwood City Council. But one of the reasons this catastrophe happened is because U.S. intelligence sources said that there was a minimum 90 days before the Taliban could ever possibly amass the kind of strength and numbers necessary to do something like this. Turned out it was closer to 90 hours. It's the same intelligence service that said that the Soviet Union was going to essentially last forever, and was completely unaware of the collapse of the Soviet Union until they saw the news of it on CNN. However, the intelligence services of the United States have been active in doing things like planting false stories and dossiers about Donald Trump and spying on the American people and all the rest of this stuff. So the failure is so monumental, and it's not just the failure of the intelligence services or the office of the president or the top brass at the Pentagon, who should know better than all of this. It's just a complete and total failure all across the board. And as the only people reporting accurately on domestic American politics, Sky News Australia had to say, was this is a catastrophe so big that not even CNN could cover this up for this administration.
I think that military planners have a tendency to plan things in terms of military behavior. And so they were thinking It's going to take time to prepare the battle space. The Taliban is not that well organized. They're going to have to get organized in order to be able to take territory and hold territory. So they think like military guys do. But the battle space was already prepared because the battle space isn't mountains and valleys. The battle space is between the ears of the average Afghan citizen, somebody living in that country. And that battle space was prepared. Fear of the Taliban was already such a powerful influence there that guns are not required. All you have to do is pull away the law. In essence, pull away the U.S. military and their
sheriff.
protective. Yes, exactly. And the rest of the country collapses before them because they know what the Taliban are capable of. And when you see people rushing to the airport or clinging to the sides of airplanes, do you understand how desperately dangerous these people understand the Taliban to be? I mean, who even just leaves their home with what they can carry in their own two hands to jump on a strange plane to go to an unknown place in hopes of getting away from something, unless it is a tremendously terrifying, fearful force that they know is going to torture them, to kill them, to slaughter their loved ones? Who hangs onto the side of an airplane thinking, well, this would be better than falling into the hands of the Taliban? And so you can go and talk to military experts and diplomats and politicians and ask them what they think might happen when the U.S. pulls out of Afghanistan. Or maybe you could talk to some people in Afghanistan. I mean, if the Biden administration had done any planning at all, I would just ask them to kind of walk down the street and ask people, hey, what would you do if the Taliban were suddenly in charge? Let's say, even if it took them 90 days to do that, how would you conduct yourself at that point? My guess is they would get a universal response from about 90% of people in that country who would say, I want to get the heck out of here because we are in jeopardy. This whole thing's going to crash. The fact that we didn't know this or didn't understand this or didn't think it could happen faster. I mean, there's a question that should come up in every strategic planning meeting of any sort, military, business, or whatever. And that question that should be echoed after everybody makes a statement should be, what if we're wrong? What if we're wrong? And the problem is, it sounds like nobody thought that they were wrong. And that is hubris. That is arrogance. I mean, the Soviet Union had all kinds of determination to do what they thought they were going to be able to do in Afghanistan, and they had to leave with their tail between their legs after losing millions of rubles and lives, hundreds or thousands of lives. And so what really disturbs me about this is, who's in charge of these negotiations? What kind of people are we getting as diplomats? What kind of people are developing military strategy and political strategy? Are these people literally incapable of talking to everyday normal people in Afghanistan and saying, tell me, what do you think's going to happen here? You live here. You've been here for 30, 40, 50 years. What do you think's going to happen?
There's an expression that actually goes back quite a bit through history. But when there were discussions about between General Ludendorff and I forget his person he was talking to about the British soldiers that they were fighting in World War I. I actually want to get this guy's name unless it's right in front of me.
Was it Falkenhayn?
No, it was Ludendorff talking to a German officer named general officer named Hoffman. And Ludendorff, who was commanding the German forces, said these Englishmen are fighting like lions. And Hoffman said, yes, that's true, but they're lions that are being led by donkeys. And that is the thumbnail description for World War I. Lions led by donkeys. I watched, before this whole catastrophe happened just a few days ago, I watched a movie called The Outpost, which is about the Battle of Kadesh, where an outpost, a U.S. forward outpost called Keating, which was located in the very bottom of a bowl of a valley and was identified by the people who placed the base there. They called it Camp Custer because anybody who's stationed there is going to die. Well, Camp Custer was in play for quite a long time, and they continued to fire down on these American forces on a daily basis. And finally, they realized exactly how the base worked. And then in 2009, I want to say, they brought in 350 Taliban, surrounded them from the mountains below. I think there were 48 American soldiers down there. And they launched this overwhelming attack. And in the course of 12 hours, 7 Americans were killed. 30-something were wounded. 2 Congressional Medal of Honors were issued on the same day, any number of silver stars and bronze stars for valor. Americans lost 7 killed. They recaptured this fire base from the 300 people that had overrun it. And Taliban losses were estimated at anywhere from 150 to 250 killed. They're lions led by donkeys, is what they are. And of all the people in this catastrophe, the people who I feel personally most sympathetic to, the people who my heart goes out to more than anybody in this, are the 2 pilots of that American C-17 who have now got to watch that footage and know that they were the people flying the plane under direct orders from the Pentagon and the office of the president, who were ordered to take that flight out of there, thought they were saving the refugees that they did. And they did, in fact, get, what was it, Steve? Did you say 800, 900 people out on that flight?
Yeah.
They didn't know there were people clinging to the back of that airplane when they took off, but they know it now. So what do you say to these 2 lions who are performing their mission with professionalism and pride? How do you explain to these 2 pilots who for the rest of their lives, the 2 pilots on that C-17 are going to have to understand that they're at the controls of that airplane that people are falling out of the back of because of orders that are coming at them from this cluster. Donkeys is the kindest word for them. You know, in any battle, this goes all the way back to people fighting with rocks and spears. The huge number of slaughter happens during the collapse. You have people resisting, and then when they turn and run, that's when people run after you in horses. You're running for your life. You're no longer defending yourself. They spear you in the back. The catastrophic casualties come from when you break and run. You would think that a country like this, who has the last example of this, not on stone tablets and not in history books, but on videotape, you think we might have been able to figure this one out. You think that the United States of America might have been able to deploy a security cordon around an airport and send more than 1 or 2 of these C-17s, but apparently no, that's apparently beyond our ability now. And if it turns out that it's because Joe Biden doesn't have the mental facilities to understand this, we can all sleep in comfort and assurance knowing that that next in line is Kamala Harris with her in-depth strategic vision and her secondhand knowledge of what life in the military is all about. Lions led by donkeys, and I'm just had enough of it. I've had enough of it. It's time to get the donkeys out of there. And I'm not just talking about Democratic donkeys either. I'm talking about every single one of the fossilized, self-centered, treasonous people who put their careers and their own book plans and their own arrogance and their own, as Scott said, their own hubris above the lives of the people that they are commanding in battle and the lives of the civilians that are depending on them. Final thing I'll say about this is when this whole thing started 20 years ago, we had an enormous problem in Iraq and Afghanistan. And our problem was, how do we get these people to work with us when they have the example of what happened to the people who worked with us in Vietnam? How do we possibly convince Afghans and Iraqis who actually believe in things like freedom and governance and law? How are we going to convince them to trust the United States after watching the footage of what happened in Hanoi? I'm sorry, not Hanoi, Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City now. Well, that problem just got bigger. And it doesn't hurt to remember, as a final thought, on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which is just a few weeks away, that the reason that Osama bin Laden launched those attacks was because he watched what happened to the retreat in Vietnam and were convinced that this was a paper tiger, that this country was a country of decadent, well done, cowardly has-beens. And during the last 20 years, we've been able to disabuse them of that particular notion, but there's the evidence on the table. When the things that will follow from things like the collapse of the French and the British at Munich, and the United States turning tail and running in Vietnam, the consequences of those catastrophes take a few years to develop, but they will develop, and we'll have to go through this whole thing again. And it's enough to make you want to just tear your hair out and rend your clothes. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. We'll see you next week here on Right On.